you guys here are here in teams because food safety and entrepreneurship really in general is it's a team sport. So let's get started. Like I said, always interrupt and ask questions because one of the things that I need to relay to you is that this is the first of probably a whole handful of regulations that are coming down. I'm here and not in Washington, D.C. right now because the USDA, as we speak, is having a meeting in Washington, D.C. about enforcing the listeria rule in retail establishments. Okay, so they're starting with grinding. Listeria is coming soon. So and this was a 6-year process. They're kind of at the end of that process with the listeria rule. So we're looking for that. We're looking for that to come, and it's probably going to be promulgated along the same lines as this rule. So basically, what the USDA, what happened was, I mean, I'm sure you all know about what's going on, what went on, what's been going on with E. coli, shikatoxin-producing E. coli in beef, right? And the USDA, pretty much all on its own, so the Food Safety Inspection Service, which is one arm of the USDA, all right, there are 17 different agencies within the USDA, and the one we're concerned with here today is FSIS, the Food Safety Inspection Service. They found out that when they did an E. coli investigation, or when they did any outbreak investigations, the investigations fell apart when they hit the grocery stores. And they could not figure out what went where in the grocery stores, and then what lots of ground beef to recall, or what lots of turkey, or whatever that was getting ground at the retail environment. So they spent a long time, and they decided that the USDA now has jurisdiction in your establishments. So y'all are regulated under the food code, right? That sounds familiar to everybody. You're regulated under the food code. Keep hot foods hot, keep cold foods cold, keep your refrigerators cold, that sort of thing. The food code comes under state health and human services departments. It's the health inspectors that come and see you most of the time, not really the ag inspectors, though if you do some other things in your shop, which you guys might do, the ag inspectors might be there. Which brings up a question, are any of y'all HACCP trained, meat and poultry HACCP? No, okay. All this stuff makes a little more sense if you have like a context of HACCP. And have any of you actually heard of HACCP? Okay, so a lot of you have heard of HACCP. So FSIS in 1996 came out with what we call the mega reg, okay? And that said that if you're USDA inspected, you have to have HACCP plans. If you read this rule, it's coming from that paradigm, okay? That there are ways that we control hazards, E. coli, and they're worried about E. coli in specific. So what they really did is they funneled it down because it's retail establishments. So instead of, where you guys get all your boxed beef or carcasses or whatever, they have this many regulations. This is like funneled down into one to give you something to get a handle on. All right, and so that's what they were doing. And this is the first, and I think a lot that are coming. I think I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not standing up here and talking about listeria next year. Okay, so, and I'm happy to answer, if we want during questions and answers, I'm happy to talk about slicers and all that jazz with listeria. So what we're gonna do, and the SOP that's I think now in front of all of you, yay. We're gonna go through this whole SOP, and what it really does is break down the rule. Now, what I did not do is I didn't print out the rule. All right, reading the Code of Federal Regulations at any time of the day is boring, and you guys can go read it. If you just Google retail, USDA retail beef grinding rule, you'll find the announcement, and it goes through it. It goes through it, and you're more than welcome to read it if you have trouble falling asleep. But this is essentially what's going on. Is that they're saying now you have to keep track of stuff, okay? And they're telling you how to keep track of it. And what they're worried about is E. coli, okay? So E. coli comes into your establishments through beef carcasses. Okay, now, here's the truth. 75% of your foodborne illness comes in through your green plates, okay, that you sell. But USDA is not worried about that. They're worried about ground beef. Because I think they can control that better. So is there's a certain set of information that you have to record on any beef that comes into your store that is then going to end up ground into anything. So whether you're making custom blends or you're just taking chubs and regrinding chubs so it looks prettier, it's all got to be recorded, okay? And that's what the SOP in front of you is designed to help you do. It's designed to help break down the rule and walk through it step by step, okay? So now we're gonna get into what that SOP actually means and how to walk through it. And as part of that, we're gonna I'm gonna talk to you about writing SOPs. So I came to food safety through the U.S. Army. I am a veterinarian. I am one of like 800 in the country. And the U.S. Army is in charge of the U.S. food supply because, as Napoleon tells us, an army travels on its stomach, and that stomach can't have foodborne illness. So a really fun story about how foodborne illness makes a really big difference. Back in the Revolutionary War, during the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, the cook, about a week before the battle, the British cook was trying to feed the troops. And he had some chickens, and it didn't smell really good. But he had nothing else to feed the officers, okay? And so what he did was he went out and he got some spices, and he got a lot of salt, and he cooked that chicken, and he gave it to the officers. And then, during the battle, all of the officers were in the latrine. The rebels dropped one shell, it hit the latrine, and killed all the officers, and we won the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga. Foodborne illness has made a really big difference in history, okay? So, you know, and it's, I mean, it's a funny story, but this systematized foodborne illness comes to us through the U.S. military. The Department of Defense is the largest buyer of everything in the world, including food, and they had to make sure that the food that they were getting was not making us sick, okay? And considering the number of people that we feed, they've done a really good job on it, okay? You know, what you think about K-rations for any Vietnam vets in the, in the audience, notwithstanding, it probably didn't make you sick. Okay, so, but what the Army also gave us, and what the whole military gave us, was this idea of standard operating procedures. If it can be done with a standard operating procedure, and the Army's written a manual for it, okay? And this is what we do at Dirigo Food Safety. We bring this operations to food production to transform it to bring entrepreneurship, because that's what you guys are doing. We're all small. We are never going to have economies of scale. No, that's you guys sitting there. But we're never going to have economies of scale. So what we have to do is we have to drive efficiency. And we drive efficiency by doing the right thing, the right way, the same way, every single time we do it. And we do that through standard operating procedures. So have any of y'all written standard operating procedures before? Guess not. Okay, excellent. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk through what a standard operating procedure is, and we're going to learn the beef grinding rule at the same time. Okay? And then the idea is that you can take this sort of template and start operationalizing everything that you're doing. Because if you do things the same way, that's how you get efficiencies. That's how you train your employees to do what it is that you want them to do, right? So, so when we, so if you'll take out, and it's probably on the top of everybody's anyway. So looking at this, all right, this is how we build an SOP. The first thing we start with is good record keeping practices. This is a legal record. It is a federal record. If you screw up on this, it's probably a felony, okay? Now, if you screw up on it unintentionally and you fix it, not a felony. If you lie on it, probably a felony, okay? This stuff's really serious. This is written into federal law, all right? And if you, we can start talking about what they're doing with people who break food safety laws intentionally now. It's not good. So we start with good record-keeping procedures. Good record-keeping procedures means the name and address of the facility, especially if any of you run one or two shops. The record, like the SOP has to reflect where the SOP is being implemented, and if it's being implemented across a couple of different shops, it's a different SOP in each shop because the header is different. So just company name, address, city, state, zip. That's it. Okay, so then the next thing we talk about when we talk about SOPs is document control. Okay, how many of us have documents that are in control? Probably not too. Oh, good for you. You have controlled documents. Excellent. Now, document control at this level doesn't have to be that complicated. This is built to be an awful lot more complicated. Should any of you ever get an audit? Okay, like a third-party audit that you want. I'll be talking about third-party audits later this afternoon. Okay, but these fields up at the top are for document control. The one you really only have to worry about is whoever is approving this SOP. Okay, so y'all will probably get an electronic copy of this SOP and you can modify it for yourself. But then you got to print it out and somebody's got to sign it. Okay, we sign in black ink. Okay, good record keeping practices says we sign in black ink. Okay, and then over here, the revision date or new, so y'all will circle new, and you put your date and replaces not none. Okay, and then the SOP title is ground beef traceability SOP. Does that all make sense? That's all part of good record keeping practices and document control. And if you look at your, probably your personnel records or your HR records, that sort of thing, you'll probably see a lot of this reflected in there. This is just a real systematized way of doing it. Okay, any questions so far?
The approval level, is it manager, is that, it says
yeah, okay, so that's an individual business decision. There are two signatory places in this SOP. We'll get to the other one at the bottom. But this approval is somebody in the management level says, I'm approving this version of this document, it is live and active. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right, good. So, now we're going to move down. All right, the next thing that we have in SOPs is why the heck are we doing this? All right? So these are what we call defined fields. All right? So over here, if you can, I guess I didn't realize I was going to come out so tiny, but over here are all the questions that over here answers. All right? So the scope, why the heck are, in plain English, why are we writing this? Okay, why are my employees, who you're going to make spend their time to read this, why do they care? All right? And they care because ground beef now has to be traceable in your establishments. That's why they care. All right, so that's, real life, real reasons of why we have to write this. Purpose. Okay, purpose, people get confused about this. The question of purpose is, what regulation or industry best practice does this conform to? Okay? Not why are we writing it, scope is why are we writing it. Purpose is, I am writing this because, and in this case, it's because of this guideline that the USDA just gave us. Okay? That's a live link when you guys get the electronic copy. All right, so then the second thing is, or the third thing is requirements. If I'm going to implement this SOP, what besides a pen and piece of paper am I going to need to implement it? Because the idea is, with your SOPs, is you take them, you hand them to your employee, and then your employee can implement it just by reading it. That's the idea. So in order to implement this SOP, we need to have carcass tags, or some way of marking the carcasses or the box beef or whatever that's coming in, masking tape to go on the bus tubs, and permanent marker, okay? Now, so then how you would modify this is whatever it is that y'all use to put your bench trim in or other things, that are not, the grinder is understood, refrigeration is understood, and pen and paper is understood. So it's anything extra that somebody might need in order to implement this SOP. So if this was a sanitation SOP, it would be mop bucket, rags, gloves, whatever it is that you need to clean, right? So that's requirements. Okay, probably the most important field on here is responsibilities. Who's responsible for knowing what this SOP is? Okay, what it does and how it works. And that has to be defined in every establishment that implements this. Okay, that's part of the rule. And the USDA loves lines of accountability. Okay, They are, most of them, veterans themselves, and we love hierarchical lines of responsibility. Okay, so for this SOP, it probably makes the most sense for whichever manager oversees the workers to be in charge of this SOP. It does not make sense for somebody echelons above reality, as we call it, to be in charge of this SOP, unless you have a really, really small staff, okay? Sometimes that echelons above reality is not, in fact, echelons above reality. It is, you know, that's the director of operations, that's the person who's there. It depends on the size of your establishment. Does that make sense? Okay, and then the other thing is, all your employees are responsible for reading and understanding and implementing this SOP correctly. Okay, that's your employee's responsibility. All right, and you build this into your employee training for everybody who's going to work in your meat department. Okay, because everybody's got to know how to do this, because the USDA takes it really seriously when this kind of stuff gets screwed up. Does that all make sense? Any questions so far? All right, great. All right, storage. All documents have to be stored. What the rule dictates is that these documents are stored for 12 months. So invest in a filing cabinet. The logs that you create to conform with this grinding rule need to be on site in storage for 12 months. I recommend you destroy them after 12 months. Okay? Because there is a limited amount of fishing that you want the Department of Health or the USDA to do to look at your records, okay?
Is the 12-month piece brand spanking new, or has that been outdated for a bit?
This 12-month piece is brand spanking new in this regulation. I don't think the food code says how long you have to keep records. The USDA rules for record keeping are 12 months for fresh product, 24 months for frozen, cured, or whatever product, and then canned product is 3 years. So that's how long you're supposed to keep it. Now, and that would be 3 years after the expiration date. So sometimes you have to keep things a long time, but I don't think any of you are canning your establishments. So
what was the standard for keeping the logs?
6.
6 months?
Yeah. So normally, when I write a USDA HACCP plan for ground meat, we say records will be kept on site for 6 months, and then if they're on off-site storage, they have to be available to the inspector within 48 hours, and then they get destroyed after a year. So this is a little different. This is on-site storage for a year. Okay. So, yes, sir.
And is storage of the records acceptable digitally?
Okay, so the USDA, that's a really good question. So the USDA has rules about how we do digital storage. Okay, it has to have cloud access, and it has to be password protected. Okay, and it has to have some manner of encryption. Okay, most of the folks I work with don't do digital record storage. At the beginning of this rule, I would keep the live copies, and then as they get used to it, I think PDF stored files are fine. Okay, as long as they have cloud storage and are password protected.
Thank you.
That was the question. Okay, yeah. So just a note about electronic record keeping. Most places that I work in don't have their processes down well enough to do electronic record keeping. And what ends up happening is that they end up buying electronic records and they haven't defined their processes well enough, and then they end up having 2 problems. They have a process problem, and now they have a computing problem. Because they can't, because none of the processes are good enough, then now we have to do it on a computer, and now we have access issues and sign-in issues and all the different things that go along with that. So solve one problem at a time is what I tell people. And if you're already doing really good electronic records and that sort of thing, it's totally possible to do this electronically. It's just harder if you're not already doing it. Okay, so that's storage. Next, verification and validation. Okay, so this is one of the reasons I asked if anybody was HACCP trained. Verification and validation is it's one step in HACCP, and verification asks, am I doing what I said I would do? It comes from the Latin root veritas, truth. Am I telling the truth? Am I doing what I said I would do? And then validation is what I'm doing helpful? Okay? Validation is a subset of verification. All right? And we do verification 3 ways according to the USDA. We do records review. Okay? So when we get to the log, I'll show you how you're going to do records review on the log. We do direct observation. And it has to be written down as direct observation. I just had a client, a USDA client, where I had to go through and change everything that said owner will watch trained employees doing the task. And I had to change the word watched to owner will directly observe employees doing the specified task. That's our friends at FSIs. Okay, if there is a meaningful difference between watch and directly observe, it's not clear to me what it is, but that's what they say. So I stuck watch in here because I can't have those arguments with the USDA. So we do records review, we do direct observation of the action, and then we do calibration checks. So do y'all calibrate your refrigerators? Keep logs of your calibration and stuff like that. That's one of the things that the USDA is really big on. And if the USDA is marching into your retail beef establishment, they're going to check your refrigerators. It's almost a reflex, okay? And you should have some way of calibrating the thermometers in your refrigerators so that if your food is being stored under 40 degrees, you know that that thermometer is reading right, okay? So those are the 3 ways we do verification, okay? And then the validation is, okay, validation's a little harder, but is this doing any good in terms of food safety? Well, unfortunately, that's hopefully going to be proven negative. Do any of you guys do shigatoxin, E. coli testing on your ground beef? That's normally how we do validation. The rule does not say you have to do shigatoxin testing on your ground beef. It's not a bad idea. But it's a lot for you guys to take on, okay? It may be coming down the pike, I'm not 100% sure. It probably depends on whether or not we have another gigantic beef recall. Yes?
Is there a quick or affordable way to do that in-house?
In-house shigatoxin testing is hard. I work with a lab that can set you up to do it. It's about a $5,000 investment. And doing it in-house. But I will tell you, that if you're doing a lot of retail grinds and custom grinds, the idea is that we test to find things, okay? Because the worst thing that you can have is a problem and not know about it, right? So if you don't want to do that, doing shigatoxin testing through Katahdin or through Northeast Labs, it's like a $30 test. So it just depends on how often you want to do it. When I set up validation for these systems, like we have to have for a USDA establishment, we do a lot of testing in the first 90 days, and then we do quarterly testing afterwards. Depending on how much you're testing, a $5,000 investment pays itself back pretty quickly in terms of laboratory stuff. And I will tell you, if you have to start doing listeria in-house will then make in-house systems worth it. Okay, because you had to, when you test for listeria, not only do you have to test food, you have to test surfaces. So if that comes down the pipe, it's going to be worth it for that. So, and the payback, I mean, I just did an analysis of the payback for a pretty small customer, and it was, I think, an 8-month payback for the amount of testing that they're doing, and they were not a particularly big shop in how they were doing it. So it's a business decision that y'all, have to think about and have to make. In-house testing is kind of the way to go.
It's not required.
It's not required. I will tell you, if you do get a visit by the USDA and they do take samples, take parallel samples. Okay? So they have to, they have to write out what they're taking and what they're testing it for, and you take the very same lot number and you test it yourself. Okay, you send it out to a lab. If you have, y'all have my contact information. If that happens, call me. I'll walk you through it. Okay. But if somebody comes in, if your food inspector comes in and takes samples, take parallel samples. Call your lawyer and take parallel samples. Okay. Okay. So that's verification validation. Any questions on that? Or I guess any other questions? Okay. Corrective actions. Do any of you all have formal corrective actions programs?
Employee corrective action.
Well, employee corrective actions, or like personal, I'm sure you all have a personal hygiene program, whether it's written down or not. People not washing their hands when they come out of the bathroom. Is there a corrective? Do you guys have a written corrective actions program for that? Okay. The USDA requires written corrective actions, and so y'all are going to have to come up with a way that you do corrective actions. Okay, corrective action is not particularly complicated. What went wrong and how are you going to fix it? And write it down. I mean, that's a corrective. That's the short version of a corrective action. And so if you have something going wrong with your beef logs, okay, and an employee has not been logging that they cleaned the grinder, or has not been recording lot numbers, or has, whatever, get out a piece of paper, write down the date and time that you figured it out, write down what happened, and write down what you're going to do to fix it, and that's corrective action. And that'll be good enough for this, okay? But it's really, the first thing as an auditor that I look at is I look at corrective actions. Because if you're not doing corrective